What do the states in the storm zone need, Mr. President?
Okay?
What do the states in the storm zone, what do they need after what you saw today?
Oh, in the storm zone.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what storm they're talking about. They're getting everything they need, and they're very happy across the board.
That is an absolute lie. The guy couldn't even remember what storm. This is complete misinformation being fed to you by the government.
Where are you? Where are you? These people have lost their homes, they've lost their businesses, they've lost everything, and they need some support. They need help. And $750 is not much help.
Hey there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. So today I am going to talk a little bit more about hurricanes. At the end of last week, I mentioned that there was a hurricane forming in the Gulf that nobody had been talking about over the weekend. Obviously, people started talking about it. Hurricane Milton has very quickly, gained a lot of strength up to a Category 5. I believe it's now been downgraded to a Category 4. This is a massive hurricane, and from what I can tell, once it gets past the islands and it starts heading towards Florida, it looks like the pressure drops again, so it could re-strengthen. Right now they're showing it weakening to a Category 3, but like I said, what I'm looking at, and I saw this thing last week, it could strengthen back up to a Category 4, maybe even a Category 5 before hitting Florida. I have friends in the area of the path of this storm, and I've been in communication with them, trying to make sure that they leave the area. This reminds me of a storm of 1848, the grandfather of hurricanes, and it basically leveled Tampa. Of course, this was 1848, so there wasn't a whole lot in Tampa, but it leveled Tampa and it changed the entire coastline. The entire Florida peninsula was modified by that hurricane, and so Milton is on a similar path as that hurricane was. It's a similar strength. It's a very strong storm. That was a huge storm that hit back in 1848. And then, here's the thing though, is another hurricane is showing up on the GFS models. And this hurricane, I've seen this thing with some really low pressure on some of the GFS models. On some runs, it's not there. And then on some runs, it's showing up as a Category 3, Category 2. But I would say to my friends in Florida, be cautious around the 18th to 20th of October, because it looks like there's going to be a third hit in the state of Florida. And some of these models have shown it just riding up the whole entire state of Florida. So that is a hurricane that I'm watching to follow up Milton. So this is just an incredible hurricane season in the Gulf, and it is it's pretty devastating. People have asked us, what if we're doing anything in North Carolina with relief efforts. And here's the thing that people don't understand. When the chaos hit, there have been reports of bodies floating in the river with bullet holes in them. There was a church that opened up a relief center where they were giving away free supplies, and they were robbed of those supplies at gunpoint. So there's a lot of chaos that sets in during these times. And, the government steps in, FEMA steps in, National Guard steps in, but they tend to focus on the areas where there's the highest population, and that's how FEMA works. In fact, when we had Hurricane Florence here, we had houses underwater. Black Cat Ranch completely flooded out, and my wife is actually out with them right now delivering hay to victims of Helene. But in that storm, FEMA didn't declare our area a natural disaster, and the reason for them not declaring it, they may have eventually declared parts of our area, it was because there wasn't enough structural damage or people impacted, because we live in a rural community, and really where the damage was right on the edge of two counties, And so you had to have enough damage in a particular county in order to be declared by FEMA. And so that was one heck of a predicament. But even then, Black Cat Ranch didn't have flood insurance. They didn't have flood insurance, and there's a story behind that I'll get to in a second, because it ended up working out okay. But because they didn't have flood insurance, because they didn't have FEMA, they didn't have anything. There was nobody there. There was no backup to fund anything. And my wife and I, this is when we first realized that we could have an impact through social media. We went down, we filmed it. We had been filming the storm because it was hitting us, obviously, and we had filmed the floods. So we went down and we documented everything that was going on with our neighbors and Black Cat Ranch. And we were able to do a rather successful fundraiser on GoFundMe. But again, you know, these fundraisers that raise $18,000, $20,000, a lot of times, if you think about the personal items people lose, it's generally a lot more than that, especially in, you know, how much things cost today to be able to replace your wardrobe, to be able to replace your tools, to be able to replace the supplies that you need to go back to operating. I mean, it's a considerable amount of money. So the story behind them not having insurance for floods, I was actually the realtor that sold them their house, and we became friends with them. And so you can imagine we were in the process of moving all their horses onto our land and really trying to help out. We basically lived on an island, so there was nobody else to really help out during that time other than neighbors, and that's what you're starting to hear about in the mountains. But anyway, you know, you can imagine amongst all this, and then they come to us and say, hey, we don't have flood insurance because when we bought our property, nobody said it was in a flood zone. It was in a 500-year floodplain, and I actually disclosed it. So I was surprised by that. And I was like, you know, we actually did disclose that on the property disclosures. I'm surprised you don't have flood insurance. It's normally required if you're in any of those flood zones, any of the FEMA flood zones. And so what we found out was we got a copy of the appraisal, and the appraising company had pinpointed the location of the house in the wrong spot on the property. Needless to say, things ended up working out for them, but not without some pressure, not without some digging. The bank tried to wipe their hands of it. It was a mess for them, and it took some time to be able to get resources. But the community came together, and, you know, for a lot of the people along the river, you know, eventually things get rebuilt. What we're seeing in the mountains of North Carolina is absolutely horrific. They're still, after a week, doing search and rescue missions. There are still areas they haven't been able to get into. When the government says that they're giving people $750, which is a load of baloney, in my opinion. They've given way more to people who are not citizens of this country, way more. A lot of those people are getting denied the assistance. A lot of those people are only receiving $300. I want you to listen to this clip that was on Sean Hannity. Now, this is the mayor of Newland. I'm going to post a video link up here so you can see what Newland is like. These are our neighbors, and we've loved these communities. We've always supported these communities, and so if you look at this video, Newland is just, it was like a winter wonderland town, a Christmas town, Banner Elk. A lot of these places are just like your Hallmark towns, right? The mayor was on Sean Hannity, and his daughter's house got completely flooded. She qualified for $300.
Let me ask you this before we go on to you, John.
Yeah.
Did you get in touch with FEMA right away? Was there any government officials that you've seen over these days since Hurricane Helene devastated your home? Has anybody been here to help you? Because this is the big question. Sean just played a clip of President Biden saying that you all are getting everything you need.
What is FEMA?
Right.
I mean, it's literally, what is FEMA? So my daughter, whose house got completely wiped out, she has no flood insurance, meets with a FEMA person, applies for everything doesn't get the $750 that Kamala says that she's supposed to get, gets approved for $300 for personal items. What is that going to do? That's literally what she got. Her entire first floor is wiped out. We hauled everything off. It's gone. So what is FEMA? And being a mayor,
So they didn't even give her the full
they didn't
$750.
even give her $750. Denied the $750.
They gave her $300.
They gave her $300. That won't even cover what's in the refrigerator.
And this is what concerns me, is we are heading into another storm, and from what I can tell, there's a storm following that one on October 20th, and FEMA is telling Congress we don't have enough money to make it through hurricane season. We don't have enough money to make it through Helene relief. But the money has been put into FEMA and has gone to other places. And I realize, $650 million is not going to go a long way with these storms, but it would have helped out some of these people now. And when FEMA comes in and starts cutting corners, and that's typically what they do. That's what we saw here, and that was under a different administration. It's just the bureaucracy of these government agencies. The first thing they do is they try and cut corners. So what you're starting to see in the mountains of North Carolina is, number one, only about 20% of those people had flood insurance. They're in the mountains. It's not typically something that they would think of, or that anybody would assume you would need flood insurance up in the mountains. But clearly, if you live in Vermont, you know what I'm talking about. You do need flood insurance. But a lot of these people don't have flood insurance. And if flood insurance isn't on your insurance policy, you're not covered. Okay, and if FEMA declares your property damage under certain clarifications, you're not covered by FEMA.
Yeah, I lost my home. My home was still standing. It was a little different than the rest of my neighborhood. Our neighborhood lost 4 homes, just washed away and wiped out. But my home was on an 80-foot cliff, and it was standing. And I have a photo of it standing the next day after the storm. There were still winds coming through and everything, and later that day, it fell off the cliff. And I contacted FEMA, and they were easy to get a hold of. They called me back, but while I was talking to FEMA, they told me they'd have to meet me at my property.
And a lot of them didn't even make their way up to the property.
No, they haven't been able to access the property, but while I was talking to them, I was driving down the road, and the FEMA person told me before I hung up, he said, well, we're categorizing this as a mudslide.
So,
but they
Sean,
haven't even been to my property yet, and they've already categorized it to where my insurance won't give me anything.
Sean, this is important. What's happened for a lot of people is that FEMA has been categorizing before they've even seen it as mudslides, so they're not covering. They're saying the Hurricane Helene victims. It's a tragedy all the way around, Sean. We're going to be out here all week. I can tell you this. The community is what's together on this, and community helping community and neighbor helping neighbor. And everyone is frustrated with the White House and with FEMA. And for the most part, they feel abandoned.
And so what you're starting to see is FEMA come in and declare the destruction of properties from mudslides or other things and not covering the damage. All of this stuff that you're hearing is factual. The delayed response from the government in a lot of these areas is horrendous. When they went into Newland is the town I was just talking about, completely flooded out. They sent a small handful of National Guard.
It was very slow. I finally contacted State Senator Warren Daniel, who has been assisting our area. We're overlapping legislative districts to get help. He finally contacted the National Guard, but he asked me, what do you need? We originally had a handful of soldiers in Banner Elk, and I said, we need more than a handful. We need military police, doctors, nurses, medics, water purification technicians, general soldiers.
What about FEMA?
FEMA and engineers and heavy equipment. What we're doing in their stead, and some finally did roll in, but we're just getting volunteers coming in with equipment and helping people. So,
but what President Biden said, is that the case?
I'm certainly not going to call the President of the United States a liar, but I've seen no evidence that it's functioning the way he's given a glowing recommendation of.
I will.
Now, what my wife and I are doing, and we've been trying to figure out what we can do with Meet My Neighbor Productions. Now, Meet My Neighbor Productions is our nonprofit that films agricultural properties. Our purpose is to educate people about agriculture. We also added on to the nonprofit a rural youth development program to help keep kids in rural communities, okay? And I'll do some more talking on that, because that's been a successful program with very little funding, but it seemed to be working pretty well in the year that we've done that. So we've been trying to figure out what we can do with the focus of that nonprofit, because we have to utilize its resources based on, its provisions for being a nonprofit. And what we've decided to do is work on finding those communities. Specifically, we're looking at communities in the northern western part of the mountains where they're still trying to get into areas. If you look at the maps, a lot of these roads are completely washed out for miles. And so there are people that are in there that haven't been able to get out for miles. And these are agricultural communities. These are very rural communities, which fit more of the provisions of our nonprofit. But we're also very small. We're very underfunded. We've always just worked with the donations that people give us. When we do videos, we do pull in sponsors to help, sponsor a documentary film. But as far as just our overall budget, we're pretty limited. So we're looking at ways that we can get into these smaller communities and find specific needs. Because what we learned in Hurricane Florence was that, a lot of people will donate to the Red Cross, which is going to go wherever FEMA goes. A lot of people will donate to, some of these large nonprofit organizations, which is great. They're doing good work. But again, they're going into, FEMA designated areas. They're not making their way. They're going to go where they can make the largest impact for the largest population. It's interesting though, in talking about allocation of resources, this is just disturbing to me. Homeland Security on a Zoom call was talking about how, and this is nothing against LGBTQ people, but how LGBTQ people are already under emotional distress because of their their preferences and social distress. And so when they're in these situations, they're under even more distress, which is disproportionate compared to other people who have been impacted by hurricane relief. And so resources need to be allocated appropriately to make sure that they get more. That's just wrong. And I can tell you from anything that we have done to help people in storms, and we are in a storm-prone part of our country, the Southeast, at no point in time have we cared about what somebody's preference was, what somebody's race was, or any of that. If somebody needs help, we step in to help them. So I don't know, what they're thinking there. All of these people are distressed. There are people in the state of North Carolina on the verge of suicide all across the western state. I mean, these people lost everything. And on top of losing everything, they're finding out that insurance won't cover it, FEMA won't cover it. I mean, it's a disaster. Literally, is a disaster. And I can't even imagine an administration having officials having that conversation saying, oh, well, we need to allocate resources based on somebody's sexual preferences. Like, these people just need to go. They're slow to the game. They're not helpful. I mean, they're helpful, but they're not. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox on that for a minute and just focus on what we're doing. Again, we're going into areas that have had less attention, but are still under great needs, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can specifically help them. Right now, we're just trying to cover gas and things to get out there and figure out where we can plug in. We're bringing, donation drives. Shauna's currently right now on another hay drive up to the mountains where they'll be delivering hay to some farms. I will be going up at some point with basically a load of clothing because it's getting cold, and some of these people don't have jackets. It all washed away, right? So we're trying to figure out, what the specific needs of people are, and donations or things that we can collect and transport. And then obviously while we're up there, we've got labor and we've got help in that capacity. But we want to start finding ways that we can directly impact people that are in distress. And somebody had told me back when we were dealing with Hurricane Florence, I had contacted somebody, a huge podcast host, on leadership and doing all these great things. And I was like, hey, we went to high school together, and he went into football and, different career paths, different belief systems. But I said, hey, look, you know, I know you've got some resources. We're doing some fundraising for these specific needs. You know, would you be willing to help out? And his response was, well, I donate to the Red Cross because that way I can guarantee that my money is going where it's supposed to be going. There was no Red Cross where we were. I mean, it was ridiculous. I was like, okay, buddy, you do that. But the point is that there are specific needs. And as we get into this journey, and we'll take you along with us, you'll see, we'll share with you specific GoFundMes for different rebuilding projects. And all of these groups, the reason why they're doing their fundraising, the reason why we're looking for specific needs that we can go into and champion, get behind, and try and help with, is because there's just too much destruction up there. And there's not going to be a blanket solution. The government isn't going to cover everybody. They never have in these situations. Insurance companies, my gosh. I was reading the other day reports on an appraiser who had gone in and literally had written off houses after Hurricane Ian, okay, in Florida. This house is completely toast. They need $250,000. People get a check in the mail for $16,000, $20,000. Some of those people argued it because they had seen the appraiser's report, the assessor's report. They knew that the assessor had put more money down for their losses than $20,000. The assessor found out that his reports were being modified by the insurance company and the agencies to show lower amounts. I mean, these are real stories that happen in real time. So when you go into these areas and you're trying to figure out, you know, what can we do to be helpful, supplies are great. They're overloaded, I think, at this point with supplies. And, you know, labor is always one of those things that people have to have. Free labor cuts down on the costs of rebuilding considerably because it's volunteer, it's you know, but even when you're talking about 5,000 volunteers from a Baptist missionary, that is a fantastic number. That's a lot of people. It's a heck of a lot more than me, right? But you're talking about over 20,000 people so far that have filed claims and been accepted by FEMA. A lot of people that have filed claims and not been accepted by FEMA have gotten nothing because their house or their property damage was classified as different. And how many people, how many volunteers does it take to rebuild a house? To clean up a city? If there's a city left, there's some cities that have just been completely wiped off the maps. I mean, what we're facing is unprecedented. And what Florida is about to face, again, it's been precedented before in the 1800s, and I've said on this channel several times, you know, I have read documents and things from back in the 1400s when they determined that the Florida was unsettleable because of the amount of storms that were forming in the Gulf. It was very similar to what we're seeing right now. And if you go far enough back in history, there was actually a period in history where hurricanes across the Southeast were just phenomenal. And that's going back hundreds of years. But eventually, you know, we can expect to re-see some of those events again. And I think that's where we're headed right now. At least, you know, what we're seeing now is very similar to what we saw back in the 1800s. You know, again, you know, if you are looking for ways to provide relief to these folks, going in first thing as a first responder is a very challenging task, a very dangerous task. For those who are able to do that, that is fantastic. You guys are the boots on the ground when these things happen. But as things progress, number one, we have a tendency to forget very quickly. And these are not communities that can be forgotten. These communities have been wiped out. It's going to take years to rebuild them. They won't even have the highways reopened for another year. And so this is big, okay? So we can't forget these people, but there's the time that starts now when you can start reaching out and start finding specific needs that are falling short of the big help. You know, the big help that's focused on where it can contribute its resources and spread them the thinnest to cover as many people. And you can start to go in there and really start making an impact on people's lives. And that's kind of what our goal is at the moment with these storms, is to find those specific needs and get in there. The storm that's on October 20th, just so you guys know, there are some paths that show that it could hit other parts of the Southeast, not Florida. And so I would just, if you're in the Georgia or Carolinas, be aware that that system is something to be cautious of. It's shown up several times on the GFS models. When it's this far out, it's really hard to tell, right? It's hard to tell what's going to happen. But the last one we were correct on, that's Milton. And Milton has definitely turned into something that is very dangerous. You can see the people just evacuating from Florida right now. So anyway, guys, until next time, stay safe and keep these people in your prayers. These are people just like you and I. And, it's up to us as a community to really reach out and do what needs to be done. You cannot put yourself in a position where you rely on the government, and it's not a fail-safe. You can't trust that, your donations that are going to these organizations where the CEOs are getting paid $500,000 a year, that what you're actually contributing to them is necessarily making it to the type of destination you want it to go to. It's sad, but that's the way it is. They actually, I was reading something about a guy in Key West who had, they were trying to get supplies down there. They had shut off the road. They waited until after midnight and loaded everything up on whalers and jet skis and boats and took an 80-mile trip into the Keys. When they got there, obviously people were ecstatic to get the supplies. They thought they had been forgotten. And they were able to coordinate with local officials to try and start getting trucks coming in. And then FEMA gets there and starts shutting down the operation, saying that they can't bring their food and supplies in because they weren't approved vendors. So we have approved vendors that are protected. And by the way, the word vendor does not imply donations. It implies that the government funds are paying specific protected vendors for the goods that are going in after a disaster. That's a mess. To turn down free stuff, to use taxpayer dollars to line the pockets of people in a disaster, that's just sickening.